Welcome again, everybody. We go to the final part of this synthesis webinar, and really pleased to have heard the contributions in the first round. In the second round, we will have a panel with guests from different countries in Africa, and those guests were very active participants in the previous series. First of all, there's Dr. Karuho, Head of Markets of AGRA, based in Kenya. Secondly, we have Mrs. Nathalie Ingabire. She's a nutritionist of SNV in Rwanda. And thirdly, we have Mrs. Cynthia Onyangore. She's Managing Director of Trade Up Commodities Ltd. From Kenya, I understood, but she's based in the Netherlands. Most welcome to you. Let's kick off immediately. I would like to know from you three, and let me start with Karuho. What were your main takeaways from the series of webinars? And possibly I can ask you in one go what you got from the discussion so far. Can you give a short introduction?
Thank you very much for having me. It was great to participate in this series. It was good also to have a practical cases of practitioners who have gone through sometimes, dropping an approach to embrace integrated food systems. Others really starting from the get-go with their concept of integrated food systems. So through various industries, now we understand that it's very important to zoom out and really look at how everything is integrated. And then also mean to look at your entry points while taking into consideration trade-offs and leverage points, but also very important to understand the landscape and the stakeholders who are plugging holes and really making sure that we can take food system approach, because we got there is no agency or any actor who can do it all, but we need really to coordinate our actions and investments to ensure that all the angles are covered as we embrace this food systems approach. Back to you, Nicole.
Yeah, thank you. So that's really a positive comment, and good to hear that from you. Let's turn to Cynthia, Director of Trade Up Commodities. Cynthia, great to have you in this webinar. Sorry for the interruptions. What is your key takeaway from the webinar series so far?
Thank you for having me. And I have many takeaways from all the webinar series. I would say my most important one is the importance of multi-stakeholder partnerships as you are implementing food systems. It is important to involve different stakeholders, not as beneficiaries per se, but people need to feel ownership of the different projects that are going on. And then the other key point that I would take away is they need to start small and scale up, because that way, when you're looking at the different levels, for example, in a value chain, it allows you to zoom in at the different leverage points at each level. So at the end of it all, what you have is a holistic approach to whatever project it is that you are implementing. So for me, the key takeaway was the need to have a multi-stakeholder approach in implementing, whatever project it is, and the project ownership aspect of it, because it allows you to identify the leverage points, trade-offs, and synergies at the different points. Yeah.
Thanks. Really interesting and great to know that you have taken many different takeaways. Nathalie, you're based in Rwanda, and you work for SNV. Sorry, she's dropped out. I just was informed. You're not there anymore. Oh, sorry. I hope to reconnect with Nathalie. So maybe then, from these general takeaways, we can go to the more specific question, of course, for both AGRA and for the Trade Up Commodities. Implementing the food system approach and those ideas that you have now based on the series, what will it look like for AGRA, and what will it look like for your company, Cynthia? Can I ask it to Dr. Onos? How do you think you will apply that in your daily practice?
Yeah, thank you. In my current job, I deal with issues related to agricultural markets, and it's very important to really, when you put food system lenses, to understand the true cost of food, for example, or understand when you are producing. It's not what a final consumer is paying only, but there are also other costs of producing that food. How do we deal with those issues? I know in the corporate world, there is a movement on making sure that companies understand the environmental, social, and corporate governance issues and put that integrate that in the accounting system. So I think it's high time to be thinking along those lines, and we may do various interventions, but we needed to understand the positive and negative effects that all these interventions are having on the target population, but also on the environment. So in my case, I think it's very important to understand even how the consumer market is behaving. It was telling when we discussed the case of poultry, and I realized that actually the European consumer, especially I think the case was looking at the poultry consumers in the Netherlands that do not actually buy legs, and they only value chicken breasts. And what is left is actually a bonus for any chicken producer and can be sold at any point, so which is shipped, for example, to Africa. And it's hard to compete with a byproduct, which is not probably in the main profit center. So all the understanding those issues will enable me to recalibrate the interventions, look at the landscape of stakeholders, and really see how we can even transform the way products are produced and consumed, and how they get to them. And we can bring all the issues related even to transportations. We discussed the issues related to localized or short supply chains that takes into consideration the resilience of supply chains, but also can reduce the footprint of commodities that are produced in agricultural sector. So I believe those are takeaways. And
then we move to Cynthia. So in your daily practice, could you explain what you actually do to put the new learning in practice?
Okay. So our business basically is about fresh produce. So our connection is between smallholders and the markets, both local and international, in Kenya. So this webinar series for me came at a very appropriate time because we are in the process of remodeling our processes and our focus areas. So the focus area for us right now is on African indigenous vegetables. So we are in the process of understanding that value chain from production to the end user. And so we are exploring very many aspects of that, from the production processes to value addition to consumer requirements. And so for our company, the food systems approach has actually allowed me in my remodeling of the company to focus on those areas. To one, and I mentioned the multi-stakeholder partnerships. We realized that was a big gap. You know, there were gaps in how the different stakeholders were being brought together in the work that we do. And then the second thing was the project ownership. We realized that, you know, it is beneficial, yes, to the smallholders, but they need to feel the ownership of what it is that they are getting into. And then the other thing that it's allowing us to do is the stepping back and scaling, you know, the way how in the SPN reflection points, there was the mention of the need to start small and then scale up. So because in that way, then you're able to fix what's not going right and then do right what's going right and amplify it. So starting small and scaling up, and the need to evaluate at every different point. And of course, the leverage point. For us, a major leverage point that we have noticed is in value addition. So that is something that we are actually scaling up on and trying to develop around that. And then you realize from, for example, the protein transition to protein insects webinar. it's imperative to understand your consumer needs, because it might be a good product, but if it's not meeting the consumer needs, then it's not going to have the effect that you think it is going to have. So for me, what this is allowing me to do is having a holistic approach from farm to fork, so to speak, and in a multi-stakeholder way. So that is a powerful thing for me, and it's allowing me to do that and address some stakeholders that I previously neglected.
Mm-hmm. Really interesting. So, you mentioned different dimensions of how it could work for improving your actions. Possibly interesting to highlight this particular learning from the youth and women empowerment in the horticultural sector. Since, Cynthia, you are in the horticultural sector, as you're saying, fresh produce. And I wonder whether you also applied certain changes in your way of working to make sure youth and women are empowered. Since I learned online via the curator that you appreciated that part of the series.
I do, because it directly speaks to what I do presently. And also what I am presently doing in the Netherlands, it's scaling up on that. And what we are realizing is that there is a power in collaboration. There is a power in people coming together to achieve common goals. So for smallholders who do not have the collective bargaining power and the voice to go into the market and access the market and get favorable prices, and then everything else that comes with working together, that is something that we're really working on developing further. So we find that it's very difficult for smallholders to achieve a lot if they're not together. So the power of collaborative in any, and it doesn't have to be, a specific cooperative. It can be farmers association at the ward level, at the village level. So some kind of collaboration to allow the farmers to come together so they're able to get all the benefits that accrue from working together. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. We have Onyangore who is back. As for the AGRA implementation, the added value of implementing the food systems approach in your work, could you elaborate on how that could also help this real transition? As we have heard in the first round, it's not just like improving the programs a bit, but it's really also tackling key system bottlenecks. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
So at AGRA, we work at farmer level, but also at system level, and at macro level where we interact with the government. So taking food system lenses will help us in terms of even helping government to design and develop policies that are coherent. Those who live in Africa, governments can, wake up one day and put an export ban on commodities without really covering all the angles and understanding the impact on the farmers' revenue and the local consumers and so on. So being able really to zoom out and look at all the ramifications of policy decisions will enable government to design a bundle of policies that, are coherent, but also built on each other with the full understanding of the policy objectives, but also what may go wrong. At the same time, being able to partner with private sector and or the philanthropy sector, if I may say, really to ensure that everything is coordinated. So it's a very important once everybody understand the benefits of having a food system lenses. I anticipate that we will have a better and a very effective programs transforming not only the agricultural sector, but the entire food system again. Mm-hmm. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. But maybe then in the preparatory discussion via curator, several people were referring to the poultry sector challenges that are related to international trade. Then from your perspective, from the AGRA perspective, would you also have a certain, let's say, power to influence, for example, policy coherence at the European Union level, since that was referred to as a leverage point possibly, to enable markets to serve domestic poultry sectors? What is your take on that? Do you have a space to influence that?
Yeah, it's possible, and we needed to bear in mind that we have a different geographies. I mean, you look at the continent of Africa, coastal countries that are, for example, on the Indian Ocean coast. Most of the time they do not have a competitiveness when it comes to key commodities, including even poultry and animal feed, because you can get everything cheaply from Brazil, from Europe, and others. But when you move into the hinterland, landlocked countries, they probably have some room of maneuver in terms of making sure that they develop competitive industry, including the poultry industry. And that has a lot of things to do. It's not only being able to shelter your industry by imposing taxes and the tariffs, but working even with the breeders to get new breeds that can survive in different environments. I have cases where I have seen in Tanzania, Malawi, and other countries, they have breeds called Saso that really are relevant to the environment and are really growing very well and very competitive in the market space. So it's not only policy dispensations, but you also partnership with the scientists, partnership with the policymakers, partnership with business leaders, partnership with the farming communities, to really have that multi-stakeholder platform that can enable effective partnerships and be able to design something that is, I might say, net positive rather than, zero-sum game that we are still facing in some of the industries. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So you really highlight also the multifaceted set of solutions that includes different stakeholders that you need to work with, for example, to boost the poultry sector opportunities. Cynthia, I also have a question for you that's related to international value chains, international markets. There was a reference in webinar number 5 when we discussed the coffee value chain, for example. That's important for the value chain to strengthen, in the end, the local food system, even if it's a global value chain. It was, for example, Uganda and Ghana that were discussed, cocoa and coffee. Did you recognize those challenges, and do you also face those challenges in your experience? That's one of the questions we got via Curator.
Okay. I actually do. I recognize those, maybe not as pronounced as they are in, for example, the coffee sector, because that's really pronounced in the coffee sector. But the issue that we would be we'll be facing with is ensuring how to ensure that the farmer is getting fair pay for their produce, and how to ensure that the profits at the top are trickling down back to the farmers and to the communities. And that's a delicate balance, really. And I think it requires a contextual understanding of what the holistic picture is. Because then when you understand how your product is flowing from production, actually before production, from the seedling level and all the way through to the various stages in the food supply chain, when you understand that, then you're able to realize what the bottlenecks are in your value chain. And then that then will allow you to address those specific bottlenecks. So that's why I say the biggest issue that I recognized was the trickle down back to the producers, because most of the time we're not seeing that happening. So when you, for example, look at the value shares in the value chain, then you find that the farmer, who's the producer, is getting the least. And for example, the traders like us, who in the value chain, are the ones with the largest value shares. And so there needs to be a balance, but that needs a contextual understanding of the entire food supply chain. And so this is where the food systems framework could really help in narrowing down that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way for us to understand how you think that. Then there was also a question, maybe similarly a bit directed to you, Cynthia, and that's about unpredictable world market prices. This unpredictability, while you're having this understanding of the value chains and how it relates to, for example, the local communities or the farmers' opportunities, prices may fluctuate. Do you think the food systems approach may somehow help finding solutions for that?
It does. I mean, it won't eliminate the problem of, prices fluctuating, but it can allow you to be prepared, the different stakeholders to be prepared in how to deal with these fluctuations. Because for me, when I think about approaching my work from a food systems perspective, then these are some of the factors that I am considering, because these are the external factors that are molding the work that I am doing. So these are some of the factors that I may not necessarily have an influence over, but that will have a direct impact on what it is that I do. And not just at the price level, but, like even environmental changes. Mm-hmm. So when I factor that in, I'm able to prepare to some extent how it is that I can address some of these things. For example, like in pricing, what we see in the fresh produce is a lot of production during the rainy season, because a lot of the agriculture is still rain-fed. And then in the drier season, we have higher prices and low supply. So how do we balance that? We can value add. So it allows you to identify leverage points in your project, and it allows you to address to some extent some of these fluctuations, so that you're a bit cushioned from entirely, and it's not so drastic. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Well, really interesting perspectives, and indeed it also shows how important it is not just to make a proper analysis of the context of a certain, let's say, trade or value chain, but it's also important to be adaptive to given circumstances that are changing regularly. Thanks so far. Well, we realized that Mrs. Nathalie Ingabire from Rwanda is not connected. That's a pity, because we asked her to be also sharing the nutritionist perspective. Possibly we can ask Jackie, who is here in our studio. You've seen her in the earlier round, Jackie O'Reilly. She also has a lot of nutrition expertise. From the nutrition point of view, what would you think so far of these opportunities to find leverage point in the system and the lessons learned so far?
Thanks, Nicole. What I can say is that from a nutrition angle, you need to look at the seasonality of crops that you plant within the food system, because there are different variabilities when it comes to effect of environmental sustainability. So from my own experience on nutrition, you'd look at what kind of food can I access from my own region, how affordable is it, and also what kind of food can be easily produced without me having to spend more or invest so much in it, and also it has to be adaptable to the environment. Yeah.
And does this food systems lens applied to, for example, different sectors, does it help bringing nutrition goals closer?
Yeah, definitely. When you look at the protein sector, it was trying to advise people to try and maybe they have an alternative to the normal, move away from the shift of eating animal source protein all the time and embrace plant-based solutions. So for me, that is something that people can be able to adapt, so long as it's within your culturally acceptable food that you can take, and they're nutritious and safe for human health, and also they cannot be able to affect the environment. Yeah.
We continue. There is still a technical difficulty, so I'm sorry for that. We continue with the conversation, but it is very clear, thanks Jackie, that the nutrition angle and also meeting the needs of consumers, given their cultural setting, is important. Mm-hmm. And it also links to these opportunities to introduce certain changes or go with certain changes. Would you like to comment?
Perhaps not on nutrition, but I would like to connect to our blog, sort of the first part of this webinar, where we talked about the long-term collaboration, the long-term vision on these food systems. And I would like to ask Dr. Ones, from your perspective, working with AGRA, typically you are actually involved with many partners in many countries. So when it comes to the topic of food systems, how did you go about this topic and with your partners? So what level of advocacy, or where are you in this process of having a common language with your partners? If you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you and I get the question. This is very good, because prior to this movement of encouraging people to take a wider perspective and really have food system lenses in whatever they do, we were focusing on transforming agriculture, but now we are stepping back and really look at the wider spectrum of things and really talk about food systems. I'll give you an example, that is related to nutrition. I traveled to some countries, really helping them to put together and analyze their food balance sheet, but most of the countries were using macronutrients. So you can analyze the food balance sheet and look at the production, the stock levels, and the requirements, and the entire population, and you can make a case and say, oh, okay, this country is food secure. But if you put food system lenses and really look at the nutrition outcome, which is some of the outcome on socioeconomic drivers, then in one country, actually, it was clear that an average person is malnourished, because you can have a macronutrients, but without micronutrients, then you are not really leading a good life. So that's just an example of illustrating how we can be encouraging people to think wider and even, uncover some of the hidden challenges that they can solve by really adopting this approach. Back to you in the studio.
Mm-hmm. And there was a question also from the chat on us, and that was about leadership in different African countries to boost this change of the food system and implement the actions necessary. Do you think AGRA can help boosting the leadership in different African countries for this transition?
Yes, we have started doing it at the different levels. I mean, if you go to the UN Food System Dialogue website, you can see, for example, you click on Ghana, you can see the president talking about the key actions that are going to be taken, from policy to investments to facilitating people to get access to nutritious food. At the same time, AGRA has put in place a program called COLOR, which is training and building the capacity, local capacity for local leaders who are involved in the agricultural sector, to really start adopting this think wider, put your food system perspective, not settle for less. Earlier on, Onyangore, you were asking a question related to tropical commodities, for example. And we are doing some analysis to say what can it take to have co-locations where you have, for example, it's being done in cocoa in West Africa, where they are trying to add value so that they can bring jobs into the continent, because most of the value added is in outside of the continent. You can do the same thing in crops like rice. When you have a co-location of processing facilities and where part is grown in those irrigation schemes, you can see the efficiencies that you are creating, and then you can build a very competitive rice industry that can outcompete even the imports you are having from Asia. So all that to say, it's building the capacity of local leaders, having, shaping the vision at the country level, but also partnering with the private sector and the other actors to ensure that the economics are working, incentives are clear. Otherwise, we can talk, but without really incentives, that it's hard to take actions and to have actors really do what we believe are the right things. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. And which incentives would be the top 3 for you, if you think about this agenda? Which ones are you talking about? Is it about funding, or is it about, I don't know?
Actually, beyond the economics of understanding what's in for any actor in terms of, okay, I spend, this is the cost, but these are also the benefits. Understand that is very important, but also the long-term nature. You can start a profitable business, but after 1 year, using the same practices, that it is not going to be sustainable. So looking at the sustainability and taking a long-term vision is very important, because your business will survive if you change your practices. So that goes beyond the short-term profit. And those are the incentives of really looking at how you grow your business for the long haul. But at the same time, how do you make sure that your investment is being paid off? Back to you.
Yeah, thanks. That comes back also to the long-term perspective, the long-lasting collaboration that was mentioned in earlier. Nathalie, I think you're here. We are happy to have you, and in spite of the technical difficulties. I see you even on my screen. So for you, what are the key takeaways also from this conversation with regard to putting food systems thinking into practice?
Thank you so much. I have got many takeaways from the webinars, especially it opened my mind, and I got that the food system is cross-cutting. It is multi-sectoral. It touches so many sectors which can be in collaboration with nutrition. I thank you for the webinar, for attending the webinars. I got so many takeaways about the inclusion of all sectors which are corresponding with nutrition, for example, private sectors, and the other sectors which are all cross-cutting to nutrition. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for the positive comment. That's great to hear. Possibly, Nathalie, can I ask you one specific question? If you're still there, could you mention an example of something you could do in your role as nutritionist at SNV? Something you could do differently in your work?
Yes, I am hearing from the question.
Right.
The main takeaway from the webinar series, I can say, is that with my work organization, the mission to have a food system is one of the important sectors we are considering when this is the reason why we have nutrition component, and I think I will be participating in the food system sector to improve what about nutrition component by following the sector the food system framework. And I think it will be important to engage policies and private sectors. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Good to hear that. I think we have time for questions. Oh, yes. Nathalie, there is a question for you. Whether the food systems approach could help addressing stunting, to get stunting levels down in Rwanda, for example. Would this approach help?
Yes, this approach will be helping because we know about the food stunting is the main causes of stunting will be touched by all sectors of food systems, by reaching where the food availability, accessibility, stability of food will be touching on the consumers for getting them healthy diet. I know that the food system, the main important people who will benefit from the food system are the consumers, and the children who are stunting are among consumers. By the food system, social inclusion will be important, and also other sectors will be touching on children, women of reproductive age, and other people who are at risk, so that the malnutrition can be reduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's good to know that you realize that this approach can help strengthening the work to reduce stunting and achieve nutrition objectives. And in fact, in your answer, you're also referring to the different actors, stressing that we don't just think about institutions, but that particularly the vulnerable groups, vulnerable to malnutrition, are the ones who benefit also and participate. Thank you so much, Nathalie, for being here, and great that we can technically connect now. We're almost going towards the end of this part of the session, so I would like to give all panelists a final word on their key conclusions of this conversation. Could I ask Cynthia, possibly? What is your main takeaway from today's synthesis?
For me, someone already summarized it, so I'm just going to repeat what he said. Thinking outside the box about things that are in the box. So that's my takeaway from that. It might be obvious, but let's think differently about how we can apply these things to the work that we do. And then very important for me is identifying my leverage points in any work that I find myself doing. Because if I don't, then I'm not going to be able to know what it is that I need to focus on or what it is that I need not to be doing. So that would be my key takeaway from this entire series.
Thank you. Very inspirational words you chose. Thank you. Honors, what would be your key takeaway conclusion from today's synthesis?
I like what the gentleman in the studio said earlier on, talking about, trade-offs can also be negative. So it looks like it's a lot of modeling these days to understand, how do you create the synergies in a way that every actor is better off at the end of the day. And it will require, coordination. I was going to also raise the case in Rwanda when you were talking to Nathalie. That is one of the countries where Ministry of Agriculture is talking to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education to ensure that they are coordinated in the fight against malnutrition. Even supporting the private sector, like a company called Africa Improved Food, really producing nutritious products for babies and lactated mothers. So that coordination really is very important, but keeping in mind that we need really to understand the trade-offs and make sure that we are positive rather than negative. So I stop there. Thank you very much, Nicholas.
Positive rather than negative. Thank you. Also very clear. Nathalie, what would be your final remark in this synthesis?
Thank you so much. I'm very sorry I was hearing everything, but technically you didn't hear me. But my synthesis is that in my own work, I will be considering all sectors according to the food system framework. Everything will be considered, everything which will touching the consumer, I will be considering it during my plan, and I will be using the government policies involving the private sector actors, especially food processors. I will be well understanding that they are engaged for the fighting against malnutrition and to ensure food security and nutrition, as the country is engaging in reducing stunting. I will be one of the participants who can bring important views on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very kindly. This is also a good final word. Well, for now, then I thank you as panelists from Kenya, as well as Rwanda, as well as Kenya based in Netherlands. Really great to have heard your perspectives and your ideas on how to put the learnings of this series into practice. We are almost here to go to the end of the session. Let me summarize what we have heard so far, if that's possible, because it's almost impossible. But indeed, I think in the panel with the guests from the different countries, with the participants, first of all, we heard that the participants, these three, and we heard of others when they were replying to the curator, that they are very enthusiastic and that they have been learning a lot during the different webinar series. They connected to different sectors, whether it's protein, whether it's chicken, poultry, or horticulture, or the coffee and cocoa value chains. They connected with many of that, and they have clearly expressed that this gives ideas for their practice, whether it's at the level of an institution like AGRA that is big and across Africa, or at the level of an agency implementing in one particular country, and also in different countries, in fact, SNV. There are different ideas for using the analysis and then sharpening the interventions that people are involved in. At the same time, this will always be a flexible approach, adapting to the context. I think that's always also been said. Sector collaboration between stakeholders has been stressed, multi-stakeholder partnerships, ownership, and starting with the people in communities or with the vulnerable groups in a country is very important, and thereafter work with those stakeholders, well, in fact, across different sectors that jointly have a task. It is strengthening the food system for it to deliver on food systems outcomes. Different leverage points, people have learned also through this series to be really alert where the leverage points are for their interventions. And building capacity and partnering with different stakeholders is important, and having this long-term perspective also for businesses to know at the long term what their business model is and how it could be profitable. These are elements. So thanks a lot to the panelists.